Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that you need to mark your calendars for Friday, May the 2nd, and get ready for a premiere night at the legendary Third and Lindsay. It's a one of a kind evening curated for Nashville's leading conservatives. You're not going to want to lose out on the chance to be part of this unforgettable night of insight, connection, and entertainment for America's men. The evening kicks off with the razor sharp wit and hilarious storytelling of stand up comedian Steve Byrne. And then you get ready for the powerhouse performance from country music star Randy Hoser, bringing his chart topping hits and signature sound to the stage. After that, you get to the main event, an exclusive, thought provoking conversation with two of the most influential voices in conservative media, Jason Whitlock and Tucker Carlson, as they dive into the issues shaping our country and culture. With limited floor seating available, this VIP event offers a rare opportunity to enjoy top tier entertainment and connect with like minded leaders all in the heart of Nashville. So make sure to head over to fearlessrollcall.com to pick up your VIP tickets. That's fearlessrollcall.com. Well, guys, we've heard don't mess with Texas. Don't try this in Texas. Texas is one of the quintessentially American places in this great union. And yet, at the moment, we see foreign gods being erected in Texas, a Muslim community being founded in Texas, a giant Hindu statue, what we used to call an idol, in the middle of Texas. What is happening in one of the most American places in America? Joining me to talk about this today is Ron Dodson. He is heavily involved in the investment world, and he often writes on theological and geopolitical issues. Ron, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, before we jump into the topic at hand, a lot of people probably won't be familiar with your work, but you do some great writing, especially over at the American Reformer. Could you tell people a little bit about your background and how you got into writing about these issues?
Well, I'm in the hedge fund business and I manage a family office, and I've done that since grad school, so the mid '90s. But it's a lot of staring at squiggly lines all day, so you have an immense amount of time to read. And in grad school, I got very interested in not only theology but the intertestamental period, manuscript evidence, philosophy of that time period. So mainly the Socratics, and I just really never stopped. Taught myself how to read Greek. I'd taken 5 years of Latin in school, and so I had a little bit of the background to do it. And like my buddy Daryl Cooper, who can't stop reading about history, I just couldn't stop reading about these matters, and got encouraged a couple of years ago to really step out and start writing by my business partner, who your audience probably knows, a guy named Nate Fisher, who's one of my dear friends, and said, "Hey, you think and speak often about these things. You ought to do some writing." And we have American Reformer as a partner organization, so I started writing for there, and then I just this past couple of weeks got picked up by Claremont and have written for the American Mind now, and so there's been some neat response to it. God has been very gracious in giving me a little bit of an audience. Hopefully, I'm faithful with that.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to dive into what's happening in Texas because you, of course, are based out of Texas, and what's your perspective on the matters that are unfolding there. But before we do, guys, let's hear from today's sponsor. Hey, everybody. This episode of the Auron MacIntyre Show is proudly sponsored by Consumers Research. You've heard about Larry Fink and BlackRock and ESG and all the ways that they're ruining your life, making grocery stores more expensive, making video games more woke. Well, Consumers Research has spent the last 5 years making Larry's life hell, and they're just getting started. Their work and its consequences have been profiled in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and most recently, Fox Business reporter Charlie Gasparino wrote a whole chapter in his book, Go Woke, Go Broke, on how effective they've been at dismantling BlackRock's ESG patronage scheme. He's making Larry Fink lose that last bit of hair on his balding head, and you should follow Will's work on X so you can laugh along with him. His handle is at WILLHILD. So give him a follow. Again, that's at WILLHILD on X. All right, Ron. So I think one of the real problems that the right, the conservative movement, if you will, though I often not a huge fan of the term conservative, but the general right wing movement in the United States is on a bit of an upswing. Obviously, we see Donald Trump's victory. We see his early success in some of his projects. A lot of people are invigorated by this. They're emboldened by this. We see a lot of people talking about the importance of Christianity and how it's foundational to our the reality of our United States and its founding. They recognize how critical it is to return, perhaps even some people calling themselves Christian nationalists. I have my own issue with that particular moniker, but ultimately the foundational understanding that Christianity defines the United States in a very real way and should be the basis for our laws and for our customs makes total sense to me. However, at the same time, we see these different entities moving in to places like Texas. We have a new city, or rather a suburb, I suppose, being planned. It's a Islamic-friendly suburb. I believe it's called the Epic City plan. And then we also have a giant Hindu statue being built in Texas, or is already built in Texas. And it's a lot of people recognize this as a problem, right? Like, we know a giant idol to a foreign god when we see it. But simultaneously, they've been told that we have this liberal notion of a pluralistic society. We're a melting pot. It's multiculturalism. And so they have this clash because they've been told that we have religious freedom, which allows people to obviously pursue their understanding and their belief of the divine. But they also know that inherently there should be a preference. There should be a cultural understanding that Christianity is the dominant religion, and that should be expressed in our daily life. But I think people have a difficult time putting that into words and trying to deal with that dichotomy between the religious freedom and the preference for Christianity. What do you think about what's going on in Texas? Why is it so hard for people to reconcile the idea that we are a Christian nation that should prefer Christianity, and we still allow freedom of conscience when it comes to religion?
Boy, there's a lot there, Auron. I think that anyone who's honest would realize that we were founded with a sense of pluralism in the country, but that pluralism was a Trinitarian pluralism. In other words, that there was a certain, and it was supermajority Protestant.
Right. You could be whatever type of Protestant you'd like to be, right? That was religious
tolerance.
And
Obviously Maryland was, Catholic, but where there wasn't with our, the beginning of the Second Republic, the constitutional system, while there wasn't a national establishment, I think it was 9 out of the 13 states had state establishment, and all had some level of Christian in order to be part of the ruling class. In order to be a representative, or even locally, you had to make a profession of faith of some sort. Again, it was Trinitarian. So how did that Trinitarian pluralism, which is absolutely our traditional bedrock, our traditional foundation, how did that become the cosmopolitan pluralism that we see today? And cosmopolitan, the liberal impulse seeks to flatten everything out. So there are distinctions are just basically become the color jersey that you wear, with no more import than that. And it's really, we can get into the specifics of this statue here in a minute, but I think it had to do with in the middle of the 1800s, and you had this northern versus southern clash, and the North had really drifted from the Puritan bedrock in the North. Really, Puritanism couldn't replicate itself very well. You had not to get too far in the weeds, but you had this halfway covenant understanding, And it slowly devolved into kind of a Unitarian understanding. And so you had Trinitarian South, Unitarian North. But after the Civil War, there was very much a national understanding that whether, and I'm, as are you, I'm from the South. I was reading about that. I'm not real happy with all the results of the Civil War, although I think we can agree that, there were certain things that were necessary to be done away with. But you had to fill up the rest of the continent, and that was only going to be done with immigration. And here's the places of immigration. The chief places were Ireland, Italy, and then you had a large Jewish population start to come in as Germany went from being a set of duchies to a unified whole. And the Jewish population wasn't always super comfortable with that. And in the Pale of Settlement, just to the east of there, you started seeing the refugees come from there. But the huge amount were the huge numbers of immigrants were Catholic. And so how do you move from, you just have this natural cosmopolitan movement as people didn't agree with the what I always said was an Anglican elite, a Presbyterian structure, and a Baptist people. Suddenly you have a huge number of Catholics coming in, and how is that going to jive? And so this, and those are all Trinitarian, but you just naturally kind of went this cosmopolitan way as the continent needed to be filled up. And if we didn't fill it up, somebody else would. Spain, maybe one of the Asian nations, Mexico was France. And so, so you have this lamentable degradation, at least in my mind, coming from what was a pluralism of, hey, we all agree that Jesus is the Lord of not only heaven, but also of earth. And therefore he needs to be, we're going to, in the way we rule and write our laws, we're going to recognize that, to more of a positivism. The laws are just what we decide the laws are. And that went along with this cosmopolitan changeover. And I don't know, I have similar reservations about Christian nationalism maxing, only because nationalism means something different to everybody you ask. If by nationalism you mean the government owes its first loyalty to its citizens, I'm down with that. I think that's absolutely, kind of a Hobbesian bargain that, but it tends to mean something. Every time I ask somebody what they mean by national, Stephen Wolfe has his understanding, and I generally like what Stephen has to say. I mean, he tends to be a little more identitarian than I'm maybe 100% comfortable with. But then others, you look at the Corey Mahlers of the world, and I'm really not comfortable with that. So I don't know how we get from where we are back to what I would personally like, which is, yes, pluralism is great, but you've got to fence it somehow. The public square has to be fenced. And I'm fine with the Trinitarian understanding. Anyway, I've talked enough. I don't know if you want to get into the specifics of this Hindu statue or where you want to go from here, but that's kind of how I'm thinking of these issues.
Yeah, and I think that's important because, again, this is always the problem, I think, when we have this discussion. A lot of people will recognize, okay, yes, we have a history, we have a tradition, but they'll identify the differences in the founding, different peoples coming together at that time. And they'll say, therefore, America is always a fractured collection of peoples and religions and languages and identities. That's what America is. And I think people are pretty tired of this because it's very clear that that's not always what America was. Yes,
right.
Immigrants have been part of this story. Large waves of immigration have changed America. We can debate whether that's good or bad, but it's it's happened, right? So
Right.
we can live there forever, but here we are. And so the question has always been previously, when waves of immigrants came, there was an understanding that they needed to integrate, they needed to assimilate to an Anglo-Protestant norm. It didn't mean
Right.
that they magically became Anglo or even that they needed to convert to Protestantism, though they should. But ultimately, the point is that they recognized, even if they maintained the Catholic faith or they maintained an Irish identity, that ultimately they were changing their norms to fit the country that they had traveled to. And they did not
Mhm.
see themselves as people who should then assert their understanding into the American experience. If you wanted a Catholic school, then you went and started a Catholic school. If you want a Jewish school, you go and start the Jewish school. Because guess what? American public schools were Protestant and Christian. That's just
Mhm.
what they were by default. Today, we see a very different scenario. And that doesn't mean, again, that waves of immigration in the past were ideal, but the ones we're seeing now are concentrations of peoples who do not intend to assimilate. What we get most of the time is it's about hard work and freedom. If you love hard work and freedom, you're an American. But that is insufficient to grasp what American culture is. And I think we can see that in this Hindu statue. So it's this, for people who haven't seen it, it's this 90-foot tall, 90-ton statue. I think it's already one of the tallest statues in the United States.
Yeah, it's the
It's
third tallest
yeah,
in the
yeah.
entire country.
So we're not talking about like, oh, they put they put a little statue outside. No, this is a massive idol. And in any other scenario, this is in Sugarland, Texas. It's of the Hindu false deity Human, I guess is the way it's going to be pronounced. I'll do my best there. But this statue is like
Hanuman.
Hanuman. Is that the right to say it? All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But yes, it's a statue of like a monkey god, and it's obviously a scenario where we have gone through this giant American iconoclasm in the last decade or so, right? We're tearing down all the statues. First, it started with the Confederates. Then it started with people who may or may not have been slaveholders. Then they went after Abraham Lincoln and everyone else. All the people that Donald Trump promised them that they would go after while he was mocked. Like, oh, you take down these statues now, but you'll eventually be taking down statues of George Washington and other founders. And that's exactly what has happened. So at the same time as we've had this massive American iconoclasm, I mean, they literally melted down a statue of Robert E. Lee out of spite. Like that's how petty this has been. At the same time as they are literally melting down the statues of our founders in our history, we are seeing the erection of giant idols to foreign gods. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, it's just a piece of metal. Oh, it's just, don't be so dramatic. But guys, if you were in any other time and place in history, if someone came in and melted down all the old statues of your history and stripped them out of the public square and started erecting statues, giant statues, record-setting statues to foreign gods, you would know you had been conquered. You would know that there was a serious change occurring. And yet somehow people try to play this off. It's not a big deal. It's just freedom of religion. I mean, what are your thoughts on this iconoclasm and replacement?
Well, I absolutely think, and it's part of the, and I'm proudly a Protestant. I'm an officer in the Presbyterian Church in America. That's the conservative one of the conservative Presbyterian denominations. I'm conservative theologically, so just so you know, that's where I'm coming from. But one of the civic weaknesses of Protestantism, because of its hardcore, especially the more reformed you get, its hardcore aversion to statues and anything that might smack of idolatry, is it leaves this vacuum often that pagans are willing to fill, or rank statists are willing to fill. And so, that's something that we have to think about, because people, why we understand, okay, in Presbyterianism and often Southern Baptist churches, we have stained glass that is beautiful depictions of certain things, usually not pictures of Jesus, but maybe even that, depending on your tradition. but certainly the apostles and the Acts. These things are important to us because we need these, just like the statue of Robert E. Lee. And we had one here in Dallas, not too far from here at Lee Park, which is now called something else. Can't believe it. But you need these things to remember your history. Otherwise, you become what I call the fascism of the living, where you're completely disconnected to what came before you. You're disconnected to what's coming after you. And it's just this complete and utter selfish existence in the eternal present. And that it doesn't replicate itself. And it does leave this vacuum for pagans or cultural Marxists to step into the void and do these things. Now, it's really interesting. This is the Sri, and I'm going to butcher this. So if anyone's Hindu and hearing me, I get it. I'm butchering this, but it's the Sri Ashta Lakshmi temple in Sugar Land. And one of the, this isn't the best part of town of Houston. This is in Southwest Houston. They bought land, which was, I think, basically before it was a car or semi-salvage lot, something like that. But this statue is, it hasn't been uploaded into Google Earth yet, the 3D imagery of it. But if you just go to their website and look, it's immense. But listen to how this Hooneman character is described. He is one who just the idolatry of it contra Christianity is unbelievable. He loses knowledge of who he is because he's being fully immersed in thinking about how compassionate God is. And he descended to the world as a human being to wage war against the evil, and then was sacrificed. Y'all, this is I'm sorry, if you're Christian, this is a satanic antichrist. That's all this is.
This is an inversion of Christ. Yeah.
100%. So, and again, I have nothing against any individual Hindu. I want to be just like Jesus. So if anybody who comes, God puts them in my path, I want to first Peter 3:15, always have a reason or answer for the hope that is within you, and with meekness and fear, gentleness and respect. And that really, I want to live that out. But as a movement, it is perfectly okay to be against this as a Christian and say, no, we don't want idols in the land. And but this is the hack. This is the hack to any liberal society. And I mean liberal not in the modern Democrat sense. I mean liberal in the political philosophy sense. Is that any incursion of an outside group with a high in-group preference can completely hack the system, because as the cosmopolitan ideas, none of those preferences should matter. We're completely flattened out as to ethnicity and custom and what Schmidt would call way of life. And so this hack it calls for a return to, we've seen, and God bless Trump. Do I think Trump thinks in these massive political theology categories? I do not, but he has a fantastic gut for these things. And he's talked about the importance of physical borders. And that's true. Even God in the Old Testament talked about building the walls for defense. Offensive weaponry is not good. Don't go get chariots or war horses, but build up the walls. So physical borders, that's a good thing. Now with tariffs, economic borders, you don't have to be a tariff maximalist, but just you have the tool at your disposal to say, hey, and I'm a big fan of Nick Land, as I know you are, Auron, who talks about if you have light speed, borderless capital, it's going to eat everything in its path. It just is. And by the way, Nick Land, worth reading. If you have a philosophical mind, go check him out. Really interesting guy. But now we're seeing, hopefully this is leading us to see to the importance of presuppositional or metaphysical borders. And that doesn't mean they have to be the most narrow or high, but but you've got to have some, because otherwise you're going to completely lose yourself in a chaotic factionalism that is impossible to govern, and without an iron rod at some point. And your people are going to be miserable because there is no unity of the public square. Okay.
Yeah.
Law can never rule the heart. Okay. But it can rule the public square. And you've got to have some kind of border there. But liberalism has said metaphysics is outlawed, basically. And this is the fruit of that. What do you think?
No, I agree. And this is so important. Like this is so critical. And this is the change, I think, in conservative thinking that has to occur here. We can't get around from this. We can't escape this. So, as you point out, the law can only instruct so much. We have to ultimately have a shared vision. That law has to emanate from the shared values of the people, the tradition, the folkways of the people. That way of being is the only thing that holds us down. And Bertrand de Juvenal did such a great job talking about this, that the more alien or foreign the law is, the more it's going to feel like tyranny. It's not the size of government. It's not even the power of government that makes things feel tyrannical. It's the way in which these things feel foreign that makes it difficult. It's when they are against the conscience of the people they are being imposed on that they matter. The problem that I think still underlies so much of a lot of conservatism is they attribute a universal cultural conscience to everyone who's going to cross into the United States. That as soon as you make contact with the magic dirt, you're going to have this understanding of like what the American culture and what your conscience will be. But that's not the case. If you talk about America being founded on Christian values, well, you're admitting that there's something about Christianity that is unique and particular, and puts you on a path towards a particular way of being, a particular tradition, particular understanding of the good. And if your job is to import as many people from another country as possible, eventually the only thing that's going to mediate between these different ways of understanding the world is the state. And the more the state has to mediate between many different understandings of the world, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, the more it's going to feel artificial to all of those ways of being. Because it's not hot or cold. It's not Muslim. It's not Christian. It's not Hindu. It's everything to everyone, and therefore nothing to anyone. And so the state becomes larger at the same time as it tries to bring more and more cultures together. It has to. It's required. And so
it's totalizing, which is exactly what your book is about. It has to be by necessity, because it's filling this very void that you've created by flattening every other distinction out.
Right. And so if we end up with a scenario where conservatives think they are reducing the size of government by saying freedom of religion or these kind of things, pluralism, these kind of things, they're actually reducing the amount of liberty. They are actually increasing the necessity of a large state by enabling the destruction of the common square and the common good. And I think this is just so hard for them to grasp. They want to measure government tyranny by like literally the size of government or the number of laws of the government, when in actuality, the types of government, the types of laws, the grounding of those laws, what they are trying to bring together is far more important when you're considering the tyrannical aspect of government.
It's the very understanding of what law is. Is law revealed? Is it alien in the good sense, not the sense de Juvenal is speaking of, but in the sense that Plato spoke of? When it's interesting. I just wrote an article last month for AMRA, for American Reformer. The word that Plato is always begins his career in the Republic, searching for Socrates. Socrates is searching for justice, but that word, and I take the Straussian interpretation of the Republic as being completely within the cave. But the word he uses for justice is the Greek word dikaiosune, which is Paul's word for righteousness. That you're searching, and Plato ultimately, it's not in the Republic. He talks about it later in Laws and a couple other dialogues. Is alien in the sense that it has to be heaven. It has to be towards a law is the discovery or the loyalty. This righteousness is the loyalty to something that is righteous in its character. So it's alien because we know they were, they saw in a mirror dimly. I'm not saying that Plato or Aristotle were prophets in the capital P sense who were receiving direct revelation, but they were struggling. They were always on the run because they realized that the pantheon was a joke. These gods that they were worshiping were just as sinful as the people on earth, and they were murdering and pillaging and doing all these things. And so in a rejection of that, there must be this unmoved mover that is holy and good, and the ultimate author of all things. And the search for that, to be loyal to that, was this pursuit of justice or righteousness, this dikaiosune. And you see this in Paul, and who was raised up theologically by Gamaliel, who was in the school of Philo, who was trying to understand all these things. And so this is not something that we're brand new having to deal with as 21st century Americans. This is a continual struggle for political wisdom. And I think it's in the very heart of the Great Commission. Remember, the Great Commission is, go make disciples of nations. And we can argue whether that's from the top down or the bottom up. I think it's talking about from the top down, but we can argue about that. But what's the preamble to the Great Commission? Jesus says, all authority on heaven and earth has been given unto me. Therefore, so the basis of all of Christianity and sharing this good news is the authority of Christ, and not just over your heart, and not just over a little patch of ground in Palestine, and not just over the ground of your church, but over everything. And we either lay hold of that as Christians, and especially as Protestants who believe this stuff, or we're kind of LARPing. And I know that's harsh words, because we do need to worry about personal piety, and we do need to worry about loving your neighbor, and you're raising kids, and being a good husband and being a good wife, and those things are important. But there's also a world project going on. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven isn't just a suggestion. So I find these, until we start thinking in those terms as Christians, again, because the founding Christians certainly felt like that, until we start thinking like that again, with love and grace, but definitely with dominion, then we're going to be fighting a rearguard battle, and we'll look like England in 30 years. And you don't want to look like England.
Well, and that's really important, because that was where I was going to go next. You have this epic city center, this intentional community that is supposed to be Muslim friendly, which means it's going to be Muslim, right? That's the whole, what they're actually saying is it's going to be a Muslim,
because they take this stuff seriously.
Right. They're not confused about pluralism. No. They're not confused about the need to assert and dominance in any given cultural situation. And so this is starting in Texas. This is proposed in Texas. And a lot of people, again, there are people starting Christian communities. Ridge Runner with New Founding, they're starting.
My buddies.
Right. Yeah. And so a lot of people will look at this and say, well, there's an intentional community and there's an intentional community. These are the same thing, right? These are people using their freedom of association and freedom of religion to make intentional communities. And so this is the same thing. It's just, it's two different flavors of it. And I think this is really important because, as you point out, the UK is currently going through a situation where they have let in a large amount of Muslims who, again, are not shy about cultural domination. Don't let if they are telling you that there is no intention to do that, they are lying. It is literally their religion to do so. So that is just not true. And if you have any question, just look at the actual religion and the dictates of it. That said, over time, and I just had this conversation with Calvin Robinson. I did a pre-tape with him that'll be coming out soon. But one of the things that we were talking about was the fact that just now, finally, conservative politicians in England are just starting to edge out of the foxhole and say, I think we might be a Christian civilization. And they think they're like a super edgy right wing, they're just transgressing all of the rules by saying that, I think we might have a Christian founding, but simultaneously, if you ask any of the politicians there, well, then what do we do about all the Muslims moving? And if we're a Christian nation, if our values are Christian, if we're fundamentally Christian, and that is what defines our identity and creates our values, if we're going to move a large amount of people from a different religion who are obviously not converting, they are keeping and maintaining their religion, building up these communities that are separate from, how are we going to be a Christian nation? And the answer, if you talk to these guys, is, oh, we aren't. Like, we're always going to be multicultural. That's just never going to happen. We're not going to do anything about it. And at the same time, obviously in the United States, the good news for us is that most of our illegal immigrants, sadly, we have quite a few, but most of our illegal immigrants are at least nominally Christian, right? Like, they at least come from Christian backgrounds. They're not pushing another religion. There are many other problems of cultural incompatibility, but at least the foreign religion is not as much of a force here. However, we do see a large amount of people pushing. I mean, we just had this battle with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, right? We need more H-1B visas. We got to have all of India in here as much as possible. You and I were talking before we started about how the DFW is now significantly Indian, how that has come to dominate much of the culture in certain parts of Texas. The question is, how long can you be a country with Christian values when the majority of people moving into, or a large number of the people moving into your country, are not Christian, and only not because they're atheist or they're agnostic, but because they are actively worshiping different gods and erecting statues and building cities around those beliefs?
Right. Well, and you either believe as a Christian that Christianity is true, but and is best for people. No, at least I'm not. Maybe there are those who are. This isn't a. I'm not advocating for I subscribe to the Westminster Confession, and there's freedom of conscience within the Westminster Confession. That's part of it. Now, I think the Bible obviously is more important than the confession, but I can't control what somebody does in their own home. Okay. What we're talking about is you have to fence the public square. And you either think that's valid, or you're going to have chaos, which eventually will bring somebody who's going to enforce the public square. Because this only ends one way, with civilizational decline, clown show, and you go from a Roman Republic to Caesar to then Augustus, and now you're Emperor Maxing. And how do you fix things? Well, you just got to kill a lot of people. And no one wants that. So, no, unless you're a psychopath, you don't want that. I believe everyone, regardless of their belief, is created in God's image and therefore worthy of dignity and respect. I honestly believe that. Not just saying that for Auron's benefit. But just think of the practicality of rule. London is a disaster. Marseille, Paris, you have no-go zones. Ghettoization and then ultimate takeover of cultures, it always ends poorly. The Roman, anyway, I just think you're either going to get some level of sanity in this, or you deal with it with some level of gentleness, or the longer you let it go, the answer is not going to be gentle. And that's not because guys like Auron and I would like for there to be a harsh fix. It's just, that's what happens in world history. You get bad wars, or you get revolutions, or you get, France. And it's just, this goes one way unless you fix it. So that's what I'm concerned about, is that you have terrible decline followed by violence. And I don't want that for my kids. Plus, I just think it's wrong. I'm a Christian. I believe Jesus truly was raised on Easter Sunday. I believe that. On Resurrection Sunday, I believe he got up. He was raised for our justification and now sits at the right hand of God. I believe that's true. And therefore, I think that what's best for everyone is for his rule and reign to be manifest here on earth. And if you don't believe that, then okay. But you're going to believe something, and you're going to and the laws that Carl Schmitt, agree with them or not, political theology is true. The laws and the culture that is produced by those laws is simply revealing who you think God is and how he works in the world. So if you don't like, if you want a Hindu or a Muslim understanding of the public square, just keep doing what you're doing, because that's what you're going to get. Because atheism has no power to fight this. Trust me, everyone is religious at some level.
Yeah,
that's my opinion.
People who worry about the right-wing backlash, right? This is always what I hear. The right-wing backlash. Oh, the right-wing backlash is going to be worse than what we have now. Well, first, I'm more worried about the actual power that is in place now. But you need to understand that, like, guys like Ron and me, we really are the squishy moderates. Okay, we are the off ramp. Okay, if you want to avoid this, and this is the classic mistake that people make all the time. This is why you see the worst things happen, is because the right wing is not willing to step up when there were solutions. When there were solutions that were less severe, that were less radical, they were not willing to stand firm. It is the weakness of conservatives, not the overbearing of them, that brings you a harsher right-wing reaction. If you had men who were willing to stand up and say, no, we are a Christian country, you have the freedom of your conscience, you may practice in the privacy of your home, we're not going to obstruct your ability to observe your religion, but we are a 100%. Christian nation, and this is what we're doing, and this is what the public square is going to look like, that would stop a lot more of possible violence and oppression and totalitarianism than trying to accommodate all of these things on abstract principle, but in reality building a country that no longer functions, no longer has an identity, and can only be ruled, as you point out, by a stronger force. And that force is either going to be Islam, or it's going to be some kind of philosophy that is radical that people are not going to want to deal with. There is no option in which you just keep this weak, wishy-washy, everything goes mentality, and ultimately it just kind of works itself out. As we've already seen in England, you move a large amount of people with a foreign religion into your country, they are not going to stand by forever and just take the subservient position. Once they have a significant minority, they are going to lobby for and receive the carve-outs and cultural instantiation that everybody is worried about Christianity having. And so it's, again, as we say very often, it's not whether, but which, right? We are going to have a dominant culture. We are going to have a dominant religion. We are going to have a dominant worldview and moral view. That is going to happen. And so you cannot allow, and it is not okay to allow the installment of large displays of foreign deities in your Christian country. That is going to hurt you at the end. You might think you are doing some kind of favor, you're following some kind of abstract principle of religious tolerance. Now, I promise you, you will not be experiencing religious tolerance in 10 to 15 years.
Well, I just want people to appreciate, and I'm not trying, this isn't meant as inflammatory. I'm really not that kind of guy. But think about the folks who are the most classically liberally minded. A lot of Protestants who are very, hey, we want a marketplace of ideas, and religion is, we know that Christianity is true, but we want that. And yet they're right, wrong, or indifferent. They're also strong support Zionism in Israel. Well, what is that? That is a very much hey, we are a people called according to our understanding of God's purposes to a specific place and land, and we're going to live in a certain way how we understand. Now, you can agree or disagree with that. That's not my point. I know that's very inflammatory on the right, that whole issue. That's not what I'm dealing with. What I'm saying is if you believe, why would you have one belief over here that says, oh, it's absolute marketplace of ideas in every way, this flattened liberalism, and then think that this over here in this situation is okay? Nobody would question. Do you question that India should be Hindu? Well, I mean, we would hope that it one day would be Christian as Christians, but nobody really, or that Myanmar is some kind of, Buddhist, or you just don't think of those things. So why is America suddenly this weird, the nation that the rest of the world thinks of as the super Christian nation, except for us? Why do we not think of ourselves that way? That is just strange to me.
No, absolutely. And I think ultimately, like I said, there has to be a shift in this mentality. I understand the desire to, again, do your best to be winsome, as you say, to win in the marketplace of ideas. But you have to accept the responsibility of governance. You have to. If you don't, someone else will take it on, as we have noticed time and time again. And it will only be worse for Christians, and it will only be worse for the nation, because both the truth of Christianity leads to a better nation, and also because the more you fracture the culture, the further that you spread out the moral vision that is supposed to govern peoples, the more you diversify that, the harder it is to actually live with some form of virtuous republic, some kind of limited government. And the more you require a totalitarianism to bind these disparate people together. There have been multicultural, multi-religious societies that work. One of them is Singapore. Guess what? They run around caning anybody who spits gum out. They kill drug dealers. So yeah, you can run a society like that, but I
that's
hope
what it takes.
Exactly.
You've got to have a Lee Kuan Yew,
right,
who is with an iron fist, just because he was not, smiling with the iron fist, but it was absolutely an iron fist. That's what you're going to get, because it's necessary. You can't, a zoo needs a zookeeper. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. It's just, if you've got all these different kinds of peoples, and you just think that shaking, like a mixed drink, you're going to shake it and, oh, this tastes pretty good all mixed together. It never works that way. And I don't know. I sometimes think that in America, because our culture was so strong for so long, and we were very much concerned with our history, separated, we studied a little bit of, World War II and, how we came over here and everything, but we really didn't study world history as much. Everybody hated that class in high school. I mean, I didn't, but most people did.
I taught it.
Yeah, well, we have this, we sometimes don't understand how the world works. And I'm talking about brass tacks. I talked about this yesterday. I was on a pod yesterday where I'm like, my encouragement at the end of it was, hey, look, if you're a Christian and you believe God made this world and the people in it, it's your job. You don't have to be a PhD in history, but you should have an understanding of how history works, so that if you want to be part of driving the car forward, you know what's in the rear view mirror. Otherwise, you're driving at night with the headlights off, and you don't want to be that. You don't want to be that guy. And unfortunately, I see a lot of that, it'll all work out, and Jesus is coming back soon anyway. It doesn't matter. Well, what if it's 1,000 years before Jesus comes back? Or what if it's just, he doesn't come back before your grandkids, or maybe it's 40,000 years, before he comes back? What then? Are we just going to keep flotsaming and jetsoning our way through life? I hope not. I really don't.
Yeah, I call this boomer eschatology. I did a whole video on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it really
and
is.
I'm Gen X, y'all. I am not boomer. So I know my hair is white, but I still
that's all right. I'm catching up. Don't worry. But no, that is a real problem. I think ultimately that there are generations, unfortunately, in the United States who have this mentality that, well, the United States is Christian, and like the background radiation of the whole thing was Christian when I was a kid. And so therefore, like, it'll just always be Christian until Jesus comes back. Like, the only way that ever ends is when Christ returns. Like there's just never going to be this moment. So we don't have to worry about culture. We don't have to worry about society. We don't have to worry about the legacy of our children or what our grandchildren are going to believe, because like God will basically end the world before America stops being Christian. But if you believe that, you should probably again check into the UK and see how that's working out for them, how not preferencing that ultimately degrades their society. But Ron, we have a number of questions from the audience, so we need to switch over there real quick. Before we do, is there anything you want people to check out, any publication or any place you want them to visit before we start answering questions?
I've got part 1 and part 2 of Power in the Age of Fracture, which actually deals a little bit with the geopolitical aspect of this very thing. And that's at the American Mind, which is the kind of the more the online outreach of the American Mind of Good Night. I'm blanking here.
The
Claremont Institute. And then I write at American Reformer, and then I'm on I try to do 1 or 2 or 3 explainer threads about this kind of thing on Twitter, where just kind of talking people through history and how political theology is kind of my favorite thing, where these things kind of all intersect, because I don't believe those are completely distinct categories. So that's where that's where you can find my stuff.
Plenty of Schmidt and DeMaistre there. That's what you want to hear. All right, guys. So let's move to the questions of the people. We've got Philosophical Thirst Worm. He says the Republican convention where we had a prayer to an Ooga Booga fire demon was a sign of things to come. Yeah, not great when you have a Republican convention where you pray to false gods. I think that probably not the best look. Let's see here. We've got JNG says there are Christian minorities among Indians. Indian, don't know how to say all of that. Sorry, guys. Looks like Orthodoxy and some kind of Catholicism, Protestant, and thanks, Thomas. Yeah, no, I'm sure there are Christians in India.
The south of India is there's a large concentration of Indians. They are persecuted politically. But yeah, and he says, thanks, Thomas, because the tradition is the disciple Thomas went and missionized that part of the world. So pretty interesting. And you should pray for those folks. They have a rough time of it. And when they come here, hey, open your church's doors to them. They are true brothers and sisters who've seen through it. I know about this just because one of the postal workers at my local post office is from a Christian from southern India, and a wonderful lady. Really, really neat story. I learned a lot talking to her.
And then he follows up with Christian/Mexican does not mean pure Aryan, white race. White Aryan is Persian. I'm not really sure what that's supposed to mean. I don't think anyone was asserting that Mexicans were Aryan, but okay, thank you. Ruler of the Donut says, insert Crusader meme. Hello, sir. Do you have a moment to talk about Jesus Christ? Yes. Deus Volt as it goes here. Let's see. We've got Phil, who says, so long as the GDP worshippers are in charge, nothing will improve for the American nation. Diversity will be the death of us. Well, Ron, I think you're a great person to talk about this. So you're obviously someone who works in finance, works in hedge funds. Yeah. You know the problems that are needed to be approached here. How can conservatives or right wingers who want to retain the character of Christianity in America, how should they be viewing business? Is it an ally? Is it an enemy? Is there a way to do to operate capital without wearing away those aspects of our nation? How should this be approached? Can business people put their nation or their identity before the capital, or is it always going to be the other way around?
Boy, it's a huge, huge topic.
Yeah, we probably should do an entire different podcast.
I mean, I'm happy to come back on and do an hour on that.
But I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do your best.
Number one, go listen. Charles Haywood at the Worthy House did a great. It's about 6 weeks ago. Did an utter takedown of GDP. It was fantastic. So that's number one. And Charles is a dear friend. He's great. And then the heresy of modern economics. of which GDP is a huge part of, is that it assumes individuals who are created in the image of God are fungible economic units. So it absolutely destroys the unique, it assumes away the unique and infinite worth of the individual. So we can just look at everything as an aggregate. So in classical economics, at least, you had micro and macro, and you didn't have modern monetary theory, which values velocity above the store of value. In the Bible, in both Old and New Testaments, savings is critical. And so, and then the last thing, you asked about business in general. So the Bible, from the beginning, the idea that Auron and I could go to one another and exchange goods and both say thank you and have what's called free price discovery is endemic to the Christian view of the world. I hate saying worldview because that word has become kind of loaded, but the Christian view of the world is we can freely exchange and both say thank you. Here's a goat. Thank you. Here's, whatever, some building materials or whatever. Where it gets weird is you have corporate personhood, which probably isn't all good. Again, that's the idea that a corporation can have the same benefits that a person made in God's image can. That's probably weird. And then huge amounts of leverage to increase rentier returns. Again, this is a huge topic, but I think Auron and I both would agree that Pareto is a reality, that 80% of the assets or the goods are going to go to about 20% of the people. That's just the way God made the world. But if you add on Pareto times rentier times leverage, now you get this weird where the 1% own 99% of everything. That's probably not Christian. That's probably not God's best view of resources, resource allocation. So that there's a lot I said there. I'll stop there, but that's kind of my take on stuff, and we can break that down on another show sometime.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty good job with just 2 minutes, but yeah, we could easily tackle that for another hour and probably should. So thank you for that one, Phil. And then Philosophical Thirstworm says, this is why the iconoclasty of Protestants was so destructive. Your own images need a physically dominant space, or that space will be filled. Yeah, and I gotta say, there's a problem of aesthetic realization in Protestantism, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody. Until a few years ago, I just did not understand this stuff. Like, I did not understand that beauty is its own value. That like these things actually matter, and that its utility is insufficient explanation for our being in the world. Like we need more than that. The Protestant desire to avoid idol worship is understandable, but that means that's why we have statues of the different founders and others. It doesn't have to be necessarily all depictions of Christ, or don't have to be worshiping statues of Christ in public. But at the same time, you need to have that presence, that aesthetic presence in your society, because as Ron pointed out, and the comment there pointed out, that will be filled. Like that, you will put something in those spaces. If it's not your cultural affectation, if it's not your way of being, someone else's will fill that void. And so that is another thing that we have to, as conservatives, be more mindful of. We should be building statues. We should be the ones building statues, if not of Christ, at least of something that is explicitly American and explicitly communicates our filling of that space with things that are of our culture and our tradition.
100%. I agree. Anyway, let's get to.
Oh no, go ahead. If you have some more to say, I just
think beauty. You said beauty. I mean, look at the sculpture. To me, is first of all, I can't even comprehend how it's done. But the beauty of some of the Italian masters in sculpture, and is that idolizing the human form? Well, the human form reflects the human form is in of itself. This is where I would agree probably with the Orthodox, is an icon to God. That just means an image. And so, yeah, you can go off the rails if you go too far with that, but we can't. Look, Islam in and of itself is a monadic, ultra rejection of any imagery. That's why they have such emphasis on calligraphy, because they can't have and parquetry and marquetry and those kind of things, because they can't have any imagery of anything else. And so I think there is, again, I'm a Presbyterian. Okay. So, I'm a second commandment. I get it. But there is a balance there where we need to be we need to appreciate beauty, and part of beauty is the human form as it reflects God's image. And you'll never completely get your brain around that, because God exists, the Father exists in spirit and unapproachable light. No one has seen him, but Jesus came as a man. So we gotta, there's some truth that gets us at a deeper level that we can't put words to there. At least that's how I understand it.
Makes sense to me. Joe McDermott says, following the GDP conversation, corporations are by law mandated to be evil, anti-Christian, and short-sighted. Prove me wrong. I mean, it's at least true when it came to DEI regulations, civil rights regulations, all these things, that in many ways corporations are required to act in a particular way that the government has compelled them to do so. I think anti-Christian is actually a pretty reasonable description as well, because ultimately the Christianity has been driven from the public square, and that includes corporations. Ultimately, I hope that the form doesn't itself demand that, but there might be some truth there.
Mm-hmm. Well, think about it. What does corporation mean? It comes from the Latin corpus, or body.
The body.
And as the corporation has increased in importance, the body of Christ has decreased in the American experience. I think those are related. Again, I'm not a Marxist. Should I have the right to invest as a share in the profits of an investment vehicle? I think that absolutely is. But should I be completely removed from any responsibility in that investment vehicle? I don't know about that. I don't know if that is good. And I can still be, remember, capitalist is a term from Marx. So I wish we'd come up with a different term, that's why I always talk about free price discovery.
There you go. He also follows up with Ronald's points on statues are reminiscent of Ian McGilchrist. In my opinion, he referred to them as communion with the dead. Actually, I'm reading McGilchrist right now. I got to meet him in London while I was there. But yeah, and of course, G.K. Chesterton called tradition the democracy of the dead, right? Like ultimately, these are the things that connect us, that bind us, that as you point out, the fascism of the living, right? They are the only ones that matter.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a rejection
without
of that
chain. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, everybody, for coming by. Of course, make sure to check out Ron's work over at the American Reformer and the American Mind. If it's your first time on this channel, you need to go ahead and click subscribe, the bell, the notification, all that stuff, so you know when we're going live on YouTube. If you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you would like to support the show, you can head over to shopblazemedia.com. Click on the Auron MacIntyre collection. You can pick up shirts like the one I'm wearing now. This is the Total State shirt, or any of the other merch if you'd like to let people know you're supporting the show. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.